Hi. In this particular video session, what we're going to look at is consumer surplus and a bit about producer surplus. But I'm going to focus specifically on consumer surplus in this video session. Now, what is consumer surplus? We need to understand something that as consumers, we demand goods and services. And the reason that we demand is because we seek to satisfy ourselves when we consume. So whatever is the good that we purchase or whatever service that we utilize, the reason that we are doing so, it is because we are seeking some form of satisfaction. Now, there are actual benefits that a consumer receives based upon the price of a product. And the reality is the price of a product is not determined by the consumer, nor is it determined by the producer. The price of a product is determined by both the consumer and the producer via an invisible haggling process, sort of like an invisible auction that takes place. And this occurs because of willingness to pay and the willingness to accept. The reality is, if a producer sets a price that they like and that they want, it doesn't mean that the consumer will purchase the product at that particular price. Alternatively, the price that the consumer wants to pay for the product doesn't mean that a producer will release the product at that particular price. Now, how we are actually able to determine what price the product will actually sell at is that the producer simply reacts to the consumer's response. So if the price is set too high, what will happen is that the producer will realize that consumers will not buy, or a few will buy. Now, the optimum goal of the producer is that whatever they produce, all gets sold. That's the optimum goal. Because if all is sold, it means that the firm is on toward that process of maximizing his or her profits. So if a price is set and very few or no customers demand or purchase, then it is obvious that the firm, the producer, will reduce price. As long as it is cost effective, they will reduce price and therefore hope that consumers will respond to the fall in price. So the producer will continue to reduce the price of the product until customer demand increases, such that it increases so much that all that was produced by the producer gets sold. So each time the price falls, a few customers will say, I like that price and I'll purchase at that price. It may not be everyone in the market, it may not be every customer who wants the product, but a few people will respond. And a firm doesn't need everyone in the market or every consumer in their country, in their village to buy the product. They just simply need all the products that they produce be sold. So if one consumer buys it all, they're happy. If two buys it all, they're happy. But the point is that the firm is desirous of whatever is produced is ultimately sold. So there will be some persons who would find that the price may be too high. Okay? But the fact is, as long as enough persons purchase and it results in the firm getting all of their products sold, then the producer would simply say, you know what, this is the price I will allow the product to remain at, because this is the price that resulted in all that I produced being sold. All right? And of course, if all that was produced was sold, it means that what was sold is equivalent to the demand of the consumers. So therefore, that unique price that results in everything sold, everything that is produced by the firm being sold, will therefore be equal to all that is being demanded by the consumers who purchased. So there's a unique price that results in the quantity demanded being equal to the quantity supplied by firms. Okay? So That was just simply a process, me explaining the process of how the market in reality determines price. So in economics, we seek to translate that onto diagrams that will help us to further understand how consumers behave, how they respond to prices, and so forth. And what we realize is that when an equilibrium price is set, both consumers and the firms benefit. How? Well, think about it this way. In this diagram here, or this table, it is entitled Calculating Consumer Surplus. You see that there's a quantity of products that the consumer could purchase of product A. There's quantity 1 straight to quantity 5. And then there's the willingness to pay, and then there's the actual price of the product. So let's just say we have foreknowledge of what that unique price is that will result in equilibrium. That is, the amount that is sold by producers is equal to the amount that is demanded by consumers. So let's say we know that that price is $16. Then, if we observe that when the price is $20, let me just putting all the lines here first. All right. So when the price is $20, only 1 unit is demanded. We observe that. So for this particular product, for product A, when the price is 20, the consumer only demands 1. That is not sufficient. So the firm may reduce. So we observe. So we're not discussing the issue of the firm reducing prices yet. But what we are observing is what the consumer is willing to pay. So we observe that when the price is, for the first unit, the consumer is willing to pay $20. So if we know the equilibrium price is going to be 16 and the consumer was willing to pay 20, then the benefit that they gained but did not have to pay for is 4, because they were willing to pay 20 but they only had to pay 16 because that's the actual price of the product, and therefore they gained a benefit of 4. For the second unit, they would have been willing to pay 19. Right, a price of $19. So again, we can say you were willing to pay 19, but the actual price the consumer has to pay for that second unit is still $16. So therefore, they gained a benefit that which they did not have to pay for, which is $3. And we could do it for every unit up to the point where we see the equilibrium price. The equilibrium price is reached where 5 units are being demanded. So the 5th unit, it is observed that the consumer is only willing to pay $16, and the price of the actual price of the product is $16, so that there's no surplus or benefit gained at 5, equivalent. So therefore, we know that the consumer who wants to maximize their utility would stop at purchasing 5 units, because if they were to purchase the 6th unit, they would have they would have been willing to pay $15 for that 6th unit. But the thing is, the actual price is 16. So if you paid for the 6th unit, if they demanded the 6th unit, they would have incurred a negative benefit. So it would not have been really a benefit, because it would have reduced the total surplus that they would have gained, because you would have received, because $15, which they would have been willing to pay, minus the actual price they had to pay, would have given you a -1, which would have reduced their overall benefit or surplus gain. So the consumer who wants to maximize their utility would seek to stop at where the benefit gained is 0. So ultimately, if we were to add up the benefit gained from each unit purchased, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and 0. 4 plus 3 is 7, 7 and 2 is 9, 9 and 1 is 10. So the total benefit gained from the consumer purchasing 5 units is 10. So we have our demand curve, and we have the equilibrium price, and we realize therefore that we could actually create a formula, right? We could actually create a formula that helps us to determine consumer surplus. So here we showed a diagram. We showed how to calculate consumer surplus via the diagram. And what we realized that this region here, okay, this yellow region here is consumer surplus. So it's the area below your demand curve but above equilibrium price is what we call, or we demarcate as, consumer surplus. Because look at it this way. $16 was the price the consumer would have to pay for the product. So 5 units and $16 would give you the total expenditure that the consumer would have to pay. So that will be demarcated by this white region here within the blue line. However, for the first unit, the consumer would have been willing to go as high as 20, but they only had to pay 16. So this difference here, and for each unit would have been willing to pay 19 for the second unit, but they only had to pay 16, would have been willing to pay 18, but only had to pay 16. So realize that this portion here, above the equilibrium price, but below the demand curve, this entire area here is what we call the consumer surplus by observing it on a diagram. Now there's a formula which simply is the base, because this area here is a triangle, and therefore the consumer surplus will be the area of this triangle, and we know that the area of a triangle is the base multiplied by the height divided by 2. The base in this case here, we realize, will be quantity, right? From the origin to 5, that's 5 units. So the base is, okay, so the base of the triangle here is basically the quantity axis, and therefore from here to here measures the equilibrium quantity, and the equilibrium quantity is 5. So the base will be 5. The height of this triangle will be the difference between the equilibrium price, which is 16, and the maximum price the consumer would have been willing to pay. And at the maximum price, you realize that the consumer only demands 1. So simply we say, what would be the price, what is the maximum price that the consumer would have to pay that will result in them purchasing 1 unit? And in this case here, the maximum price is 20. So we have the height, therefore, the difference between 20 and 16, which is 4. So the base is 5 units. The height is the difference between 20 and 16, which is 4. And therefore 5 4s are 20, divided by 2, you get 10. So the consumer, so with the formula, we realize that the consumer surplus worked out to be 10. And also by calculating it individually, it also worked out to be 10. So here we have shown how to calculate consumer surplus. With regards to producer surplus, it's actually the same process. We have the supply curve, and we also have the area which demarcates the producer surplus. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, but simply let it be known that we realize here that that producers also get a benefit which they did not expect to receive, because for the first unit that they would have created, they were willing to accept 12. That's how we get this coordinate point here. They were willing to accept 12. However, due to the equilibrium price, they would have received 16. For the second unit, they would have been willing to accept $13. However, the equilibrium price is 16. For the third, fourth, and fifth unit, we realize that we see what they're willing to accept, and it's shown on this particular table here. So the first unit, 12, the second unit, 13, then 14, 15, and 16. So they were willing to accept these values, but they ultimately would have received $16 because that's the actual price that the market would have determined. All right? This is the equilibrium position where the demand curve and the supply curve intersect. So we realize that the producer also receives a surplus because they were willing to accept $12, but they actually were paid 16, so that's a benefit of 4. They were willing to accept 13, but they received 16, and that's a benefit of 3. So you can calculate it for every unit, and then you can add it up, and you'll get a value of 10. Again, utilizing the formula with the base, and again, the base would be for the producer surplus, 5 units, and then the height of this triangle will be the difference between the equilibrium price and the lowest price that the firm would have been willing to receive, and therefore ultimately you have here 16 minus 12 gives you a value of 4 for the height, and then the base, which is so the base is 5, the height is 4, and we realize we still get a producer surplus of